The sun burned mercilessly over the dusty military base somewhere in the Middle East, where the desert wind carried sand across steel and sweat. The rhythmic thud of boots echoed through the training grounds as soldiers assembled for another long, grueling day of drills. Sergeant Mark Collins, a man with 10 years of service etched into the lines of his face, strode confidently across the field. His uniform was crisp, his posture rigid, and his tone sharp enough to slice through noise. Every command he gave was delivered with the kind of authority that came not just from rank, but from pride. To most of the men, he was a symbol of experience, someone who demanded discipline, respect, and perfection. But behind that reputation was something else, a streak of arrogance that often blurred the line between leadership and ego. That morning, the base buzzed with new energy. A fresh group of Allied soldiers had arrived, part of an international cooperation mission. They came from different countries, wearing different flags on their sleeves but united under one goal: to serve. Among them was Private Ramon Dela Cruz, a Filipino combat medic in his late 20s. His uniform wasn't the newest, but it was spotless. His face, calm and focused, carried the quiet confidence of someone who had already seen more than he cared to talk about. He didn't walk with swagger or loudness, only with purpose. As the unit lined up for inspection, Mark's eyes fell on Ramon. Something about the young man's quiet composure seemed to irritate him. Maybe it was the accent when Ramon introduced himself, or maybe it was the humility that stood in contrast to Mark's commanding presence. Mark squinted, stepping closer until the shadow of his cap fell across Ramon's face. "Private Dela Cruz, huh?" he said, his lips curling into a half-smile that wasn't friendly. "Filipino, right?" "Yes, Sergeant," Ramon replied, his voice steady, polite. "Reporting for duty, sir." Mark folded his arms, looking him up and down. "Hope you can understand English fast enough out here," he said, the mockery laced beneath his tone. A few soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Some chuckled softly, not because it was funny, but because it felt safer than silence. Ramon simply nodded, keeping his expression composed. "Yes, Sergeant," he said firmly. "I'll do my duty." Mark mimicked him under his breath, exaggerating the accent in a cruel attempt at humor. "I'll do my duty," he said, loud enough for a few nearby soldiers to hear. Laughter rippled through the group, thin, awkward laughter that faded quickly when they noticed Ramon hadn't reacted. The medic stood there, still as stone, eyes fixed straight ahead. He didn't flinch. He didn't respond. Inside, though, he felt the familiar sting, that quiet kind of humiliation you don't show on your face. It wasn't the first time someone treated his accent like a punchline. He'd learned long ago that silence could be stronger than anger. As the formation broke, Mark turned away, satisfied with his little display of dominance. But a few of the soldiers lingered, watching Ramon walk toward the tents with measured calm. There was something about the man, a quiet dignity that didn't need to prove itself. And though no one realized it yet, before long, that same calm, accented voice would be the one giving orders, not in training, but in the chaos of real combat, when lives would hang in the balance and arrogance would finally meet humility on the battlefield. The next few days at the base were brutal, not because of the desert heat, but because of Sergeant Mark Collins's relentless drive to test every new recruit. Under the blazing sun, soldiers pushed through obstacle courses, ran miles in full gear, and practiced medical response drills until their arms trembled from exhaustion. Every mistake, every second of hesitation was met with Mark's sharp voice cutting through the air. "Move faster, Dela Cruz," he barked one morning as Ramon sprinted toward a downed dummy, his pack heavy with medical gear. If that were a real man, he'd be dead by now. "Yes, Sergeant," Ramon shouted back, breath steady despite the strain. But no matter how efficiently Ramon moved, no matter how quickly he treated simulated injuries, Mark seemed determined to find something to criticize. "Your bandage is too slow. Your formation's off. Maybe they do it differently where you're from, huh?" Each jab stung, not because of the words themselves, but because they came from a man who never cared to understand. The other soldiers began to notice. Some looked away when Mark picked on him. Others muttered quietly after drills. "Man, the medic's good. Why's the sergeant so hard on him?" Ramon never complained. He just worked harder. At night, when the camp lights flickered and most men laughed over cards or music, Ramon sat quietly by his cot, cleaning his medical kit. The rhythmic motion, cloth wiping metal, needle against gauze, calmed him. One evening, as the sky dimmed to red and gold, a few soldiers joined him. "Hey, Ramon," one said, tossing him a canteen. "You handled that first aid drill like a pro today. The way you set that splint, man, even our senior medics were impressed." Ramon smiled faintly. "Back home we don't have fancy equipment. We make do with what's available. Sometimes a towel and a piece of wood can save a life." The soldier laughed softly. "No wonder you stay so calm. You've done this before, haven't you?" Ramon's eyes grew distant for a moment. "Once," he said quietly, "in a flood. There were more injured than we could count. We just kept working until the sun came up again." The group went silent. They hadn't expected that answer. And in that silence, Sergeant Mark's voice sliced through the dusk from behind them. "Story time, boys," he said mockingly. "You should save your breath for tomorrow's drills. You'll need it." He turned to Ramon with that same half-smile. "You talk a lot about saving lives, Private. Let's see how well that accent of yours holds up when bullets start flying." The words hit harder than any insult before. But again, Ramon didn't answer. He simply stood, saluted, and said, "Understood, Sergeant." Mark smirked, shaking his head as he walked away. To him, the medic's silence looked like submission. But to the men watching, it looked like strength. That night, as the desert wind howled through the tents, a storm brewed on the horizon. Not one of sand or wind, but of fate. Because soon enough, the battlefield would give both men their test. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be English or rank that decided who led, but courage. 3 weeks later, the base received new orders. A nearby village had been hit by an unexpected insurgent attack. Civilians were trapped. Several Allied troops were missing. It was supposed to be a routine rescue, in and out. But everyone knew. In this desert, routine didn't exist. Before dawn, the unit assembled by the armored trucks, the air thick with tension and the smell of diesel. Weapons checked, radios crackled, hearts steady but heavy. Sergeant Mark stood in front of his men. "Listen up. We're moving out at 0600. We go in fast, extract the wounded, and clear the perimeter. No hero moves, no delays. Stick to the plan." His eyes landed on Ramon. "You stay behind me at all times, medic. Got that?" "Yes, Sergeant," Ramon replied firmly, tightening the strap on his helmet. The convoy rolled out across the sand, engines growling against the rising sun. Dust clouds swallowed the horizon. Inside the Humvee, the men sat in silence. The kind of silence that only soldiers know before a fight. Mark stared out the window, his jaw clenched. Beside him, Ramon adjusted his medical bag, checking his instruments one last time. "You nervous, Private?" Mark asked without looking at him. Ramon paused. "No, Sergeant. Just prepared." Mark smirked faintly. "Prepared, huh? Let's hope your hands are as steady as your words." Minutes later, the convoy neared the outskirts of the village. Smoke curled into the sky. Gunfire echoed in the distance. Mark raised his hand. "Go! Go! Go!" The unit spread out, soldiers taking cover behind walls, scanning rooftops, communicating through short bursts over the radio. Within minutes, the first shots rang out. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were waiting. "Contact! Northeast!" a soldier shouted. Bullets tore through the sandbags as the men ducked for cover. "Medic!" a voice screamed. "We've got a man down!" Without hesitation, Ramon sprinted across open ground, bullets kicking up sand around his boots. He slid beside the wounded man, pressing a gauze pad against the bleeding shoulder. "Stay with me, brother," he said calmly. "You're gonna make it." Mark watched from behind cover, disbelief flickering in his eyes. The Filipino medic moved like he'd been there 1,000 times. Steady, precise, fearless. "Dela Cruz, get back!" Mark yelled, but Ramon didn't move. He was already sealing the wound, wrapping the bandage, applying pressure. Only when the soldier was stable did he drag him to safety. When he finally dove behind the wall beside Mark, his breath came in sharp bursts, but his hands didn't shake. Mark glared at him. "You disobeyed my order." Ramon looked him in the eye. "With respect, Sergeant. If I waited for permission, he'd be dead." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Even in the chaos, that quiet truth hung heavy between them. Mark didn't reply. He just looked at the man beside him, the one he'd mocked for weeks. And for the first time, he didn't see an accent or a foreign face. He saw a soldier. Then came the explosion. A blinding flash erupted from the east side of the village, throwing debris into the air. The shockwave hit them like a hammer. The radio went dead. Screams echoed across the ruins. "Ambush! We're surrounded!" Mark pushed himself up, coughing through dust. "All units fall back. Form a perimeter." But half the team was pinned down. And worse, one of the trucks had flipped over, flames pouring from its side. Inside were 2 trapped soldiers. Mark sprinted toward the wreckage without thinking. The heat seared his skin, but he kept pulling at the door, grunting through the pain. It wouldn't budge. Then he heard a voice behind him. "Step back, Sergeant!" It was Ramon, carrying a fire blanket, running straight into the smoke. Together, they tore at the twisted metal until the first soldier was free. Then the second. A moment later, the truck exploded, knocking them both to the ground. The world went silent, only ringing ears and falling ash. When Mark opened his eyes, Ramon was beside him, his uniform torn, his face streaked with soot, but his grip steady on a tourniquet. "You're hit," Ramon said calmly. Mark looked down, a gash across his leg. He hadn't even felt it. "Don't move," Ramon ordered, wrapping the wound tight. "You'll be okay." Mark blinked at him, dazed. You came back for me." Ramon gave a faint smile. "That's my duty, Sergeant. Remember? The battle had raged for nearly an hour, dust and smoke swirling through the shattered streets. The remaining unit huddled behind crumbling walls, hearts hammering in unison with the distant gunfire. Mark Collins sat leaning against debris, his leg wrapped tightly in Ramon's tourniquet. For the first time, he wasn't barking orders, wasn't mocking anyone. He was just vulnerable. "Sergeant," Ramon said softly, checking his bag for medical supplies. "You'll live, but we need to move." Mark looked at him, really looked at him. The man he had ridiculed, the one he assumed would falter under pressure, was the anchor keeping them alive. His calm voice, his steady hands, his quiet courage. It was something Mark had never known, or maybe never cared to notice. I don't know what to say," Mark admitted. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual arrogance. "I mocked you. I judged you for your accent. I thought it made you weak." Ramon didn't flinch. He adjusted the bandage on Mark's leg, steadying him with practiced care. "Sergeant," he said gently, "strength isn't measured by how you sound. It's measured by what you do when it matters most." Mark swallowed hard. The words stung, but they also cut through the pride he had clung to for years. For the first time, he understood humility. Not as punishment, but as revelation. The radio crackled. Backup was arriving. They could move the wounded. Ramon helped Mark to his feet, supporting him like a brother. Around them, the other soldiers looked on in quiet awe. As the unit retreated safely to the evacuation zone, Mark found himself speaking. Not as a sergeant, but as a man finally seeing the truth. "Private Dela Cruz, I owe you my life," he said, voice steady now but full of weight. "I treated you like a joke. But today you showed me what it really means to serve." Ramon only nodded, his expression calm. "We all serve the same flag, Sergeant. The language of respect is universal." Weeks later, at a military awards ceremony, Mark insisted on speaking first. Cameras flashed. Soldiers and reporters filled the room, many having already heard whispers of the operation. He approached the podium, his usual swagger replaced with a quiet humility. He paused, taking a deep breath. I once thought an accent could define a man. I once laughed at someone because of the way they spoke English. I was wrong. He turned toward Ramon, who stood among the honorees, posture straight but modest. Private Ramon Dela Cruz saved my life on the battlefield. He saved others as well, and in doing so, he taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Courage doesn't need perfect English. Bravery doesn't need validation. And respect is earned through action, not sound. The crowd erupted. Applause echoed through the hall. Some soldiers wiped their eyes. Social media clips of the speech went viral within hours. Military communities worldwide shared the story, using hashtags like #CourageHasNoAccent and #RespectEveryVoice. Ramon remained humble. He smiled faintly, letting others celebrate, knowing that the true reward was the lives saved, not the recognition. Months later, the base organized an international joint training exercise. Soldiers from multiple countries came together once more. Mark approached Ramon privately. I've invited you to co-lead this exercise, he said. Not because of rank, not because of orders, but because I trust you, and because the men need to see what true leadership looks like. Ramon nodded. I'll do my duty, Sergeant. As always, Mark grinned. But this time, it wasn't a smirk of superiority. It was genuine, earned through humility. You've taught me more than I've learned in my whole career, he admitted. As the sun rose over the desert, dust swirling like gold in the light, Mark and Ramon stood silent, side by side. A soldier once mocked, now revered, and a sergeant once arrogant, now truly humbled.